you are a renewable resource. So if you want some help with this one, I recommend thinking of yourself like you're a bamboo forest, or pick whatever renewable resource you want, but one that will renew itself with a little time. And you actually have this ever refilling energy bucket, I kind of think about inside, but it has to have some time and space to renew itself in order to keep giving. So on the one hand, we can give and give and give and give as humans, but on the other hand, we can't give without any breaks. You can't just dump it out and expect it to keep pouring. But if you think of yourself as a renewable resource, like a bamboo forest, you can harvest it, use it, that's fantastic, but it needs some time to come back up. If you can start thinking about yourself, using yourself sustainably, then you can actually meet some needs, and you can continue to meet. You will meet way more needs that way than you will meet if you pour yourself out to the point of exhaustion.
I'm Nikki Herda, and this is Bright, Stories of Hope and Innovation in Michigan Classrooms, a podcast where we celebrate our state's educators and explore the future of learning. Bright is brought to you in part by Mimic Insurance Company, ensuring the educational community for more than 70 years. Teachers and school employees visit mimic.com/quote to see how much you can save. In today's episode of Bright, I chat with Molly Davis, a counselor and psychotherapist from Alaska who runs an 8-week online boundaries intensive, the Beautiful Boundaries Bootcamp, which is designed for professional women who may cognitively understand what boundaries are, but struggle to implement them in everyday life, work, and relationships. After following Molly's popular Wild Goose Counseling Facebook page for some time, I officially met her last fall when I participated in her 8-week Boundaries Bootcamp. The experience was incredibly eye-opening, and along the way, I met many other amazing women undergoing similar journeys. In this episode, Molly dives into the relationship between boundaries and burnout, shares a bit of wisdom about how she walks this line as a professional counselor, and offers 3 strategies for coping with and preventing educator burnout. Well, Molly, I'm delighted to have you on our podcast today. And obviously, this is a delight for me because I know you personally and have worked with you through your Boundary Boot Camp. But I was wondering for our listeners if you could just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do. So just give us a little background.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. And thank you for having me. So my name's Molly Davis, and I am a counselor, a psychotherapist, and I run a little private practice up here in Alaska. I get to see a lot of teachers that way, and I teach some college classes from time to time, usually for graduate students. And I also have an online program for women, helping them get healthy boundaries. Oh, and I'm a mom. I've got 5 kids, actually, all of whom are grown up except the very last one. And so that keeps me plenty busy.
All right. And a new thing that we're doing for this season is we're asking everybody, what is the most interesting thing you're doing professionally right now?
So I've had this dream for a while. It's like just this itch inside of me to compile some stuff that I've just been collecting about boundaries that I just noticed is a constant need in almost everybody that I work with. And I thought, man, somebody needs to put this stuff together and make like a program. And then I was like, oh, maybe I should put this stuff together and make a program. And so I finally did this year, and it is a blast. I am loving it. It is super, super fun.
Well, obviously I can personally say that I'm very deeply grateful that you did take this inner feeling that you had that somebody needs to do this, and that you did it, because that's how I met Molly, and that's how I've met a lot of other awesome women who are working on boundaries. And if you're not familiar with what boundaries are, we're gonna dive into that pretty quick here. So today we are going to be talking about 3 strategies for coping with and preventing educator burnout. I think anybody in education is aware that there are really high rates of burnout right now. And I was just wondering, Molly, if we could first start to unpack a few key terms. So how is it that you define burnout? What typically causes it? And what are the effects?
burnout can happen in almost any area of life, but we'll use it today kind of talking about workplace. And burnout is chronic workplace stress to such, and there's always stress in almost any job, but this is chronic stress that leads to absolute energy depletion and exhaustion. Any passion, joy is gone. There's an inability to even connect really to the job. There's no caring anymore. And often it's not just neutral. Often as burnout progresses, it becomes really, really negative. Like there's just a real resentment, negativity. There's no hope or faith that anything could get better in this situation. And actually, there's quite a few different studies about this because there's a lot of money lost in worker burnout. So there's some interest in doing research about it. It decreases the immune system. It impairs relationships at home, friendships. I mean, it actually has, think about, we spent most of our time, 9 to 5 days a week ish at work. And so if that's a miserable place to be, it's no small wonder that it ends up spilling over into almost every other area. That's kind of a big deal.
Let's, make the connection back then to education. I know you said that you work with a lot of different educators. Are you seeing that in educators? Are you seeing what you would classify as burnout?
We're kind of noticing this as a national conversation, probably a worldwide conversation in many ways. But yeah, I think there are already some tricky things in working in education that can lead to burnout anyways, which we'll kind of get into in a bit. But adding the stresses of the pandemic, and not just the stressors of the pandemic, but everyone's different opinions about how the pandemic should be handled. And, educators kind of on the front lines of whatever experimental version is happening in their school district of how it's going to be handled, and facing the repercussions of that on whatever level. I think, parents upset, that it just trying to figure out how to educate from home, from the kids' home, with kids in the classroom catching COVID. Yeah, that it's like, there's no winning for losing. And so I think that's taken what was already kind of could be a real tough job and just exponentially increased the possibility of burnout.
And one thing that I resonated with that you said, just from what I've heard and seen talking to other educators is, you said something about like, the passion is gone. You can't, you want to care, but you can't. And I think that is a real tension, at least with some of the educators I've talked to, because they do care about students so much. And I know so many educators have left education and just, it really broke their heart because they do care, and it's hard to have those opposing forces like in your own heart, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree.
So let's see if we can make the connection to boundaries. So would you mind giving us a definition of what boundaries are and why they're so important?
Absolutely. And it'd be kind of a quick one, but so boundaries are basically the lines where something starts and stops. So that the lines that let us know here's if we think about them in a practical, physical way, the road is a boundary. It's here's where you drive. And then, the side of the road is not the road. Don't drive there. You'll end up in a ditch. So boundaries in an interpersonal way and in our workplace, a lot of times they're invisible, but they are the lines that say, here, this is your responsibility. This is not your responsibility. This is your job. This is not your job. So boundaries can be not just physical, they can even be emotional. Like here's where I'm going to care. Here's where I'm not going to care, And this is really tricky because most of us never learn any of this stuff ever, So as adults, we're usually kind of making it up as we go and trying to figure out where exactly these lines are. And it's tricky.
We talk about this in our boot camp, but I think a lot of us just didn't even know the concept existed. We never once had thought about where we stop and where we start. It just wasn't even a consideration. I think somebody described it as like, a fish being in water. You're just so used to being in water that you didn't think to even pay attention to it. And I'm actually just got Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart. Have you seen that? Just came out. and she has a little section on boundaries, and I flipped to that, knowing we were going to talk about this, and her definition is, she quotes a friend of hers, but it's what is okay and what's not okay. And would you be able to make a little connection for us between boundaries and burnout?
Yeah. So what happens in burnout is we give to the point of depletion. What happens a lot of times, and there's different types of burnout, but for most educators, the type of burnout they're going to be dealing with, and there is a type of burnout that happens when you're in a job you just can't stand and it's really boring. That's a different kind of burnout. You're not challenged enough. But for most educators, it's good grief. What are you not asked to do? There is a never-ending list of things that you're supposed to kind of carry on your shoulders, not just, whether it might be coursework, but it's also emotional, caregiving, all sorts of stuff, keeping to a schedule, meeting with parents, just there's so many things that the educators are responsible for. And how can they do all those things well? And especially for people who like to do things well and care, when you have more things to do than you can possibly do, you start doing things at a mediocre level, or you don't get them all done, or you just simply can't do them. You don't have the resources to do all the things you're being told you have to do. And that is the type of burnout I see most commonly in educators. And it's what I hear talked about as well.
Or they give, they do all the things and they do their best to do them really well, but then don't get sleep and don't get to have their, family time and all that. So yeah, totally.
Yes. So boundaries are the lines of like, what am I responsible for? What am I not responsible for? How are you supposed to have healthy boundaries when you're being told you're responsible for all the things? Like what? Where are the lines?
Can you tell us about a time when you first realized how important boundaries are for preventing burnout?
So as a therapist, I'm in the helping professions, so there's some crossover, a lot of people who care for people that we work with and help them in various ways. When exactly should you stop helping, in situations where there's never enough help? Where exactly are those lines? And I remember when I was just first entering into counseling, I would meet with people and care very much about them. I like pretty much love everybody I ever work with. Like as soon as I hear someone's story, I'm like, I'm yours for life. And so I would care deeply, and we would work for our hour of psychotherapy. And then what happens is they'd go home, but I'd take them home with me in my heart, in my mind at 3 a.m. in the morning, waking up going, oh, I know. Part of this was because I was brand new and I was still trying to figure out how to help. So some of this wasn't necessarily a bad thing. I was like, man, I better get a training in this, or geez, I never got prepared for this. But 90% of it was just bad boundaries. And this is the reason for a lot of counselors burnout. I believe counselors leave the field in 5 years at a pretty astronomical rate. Actually, so there's a similar burnout problem. And I learned it was very counterintuitive. And it seemed like at first it seemed like I was being a real jerk to myself. I had a little conflict with myself as I set this boundary with myself, but I decided I can care. I can give 100% of myself from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock when I see Jenny. I'm just making up a name here. But if I take Jenny with me in my heart and in my mind, if she goes past 3 o'clock and that 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock spot, then I'm not going to be here next year to help Jenny further or to help any other Jennies that may come along. Like if I'm going to help this Jenny, I need to keep her right in her time spot. And I began kind of learning how to, at 3 o'clock, I'm all yours. And at 4 o'clock, I'm not. This is your one and only life. And I trust you to live it. And I'm here to help. And my assigned time to help and care is from 3 to 4. And that way, I still absolutely love what I do. I don't think I ever won't, but I'm really strict about when I care, it's a funny thing. It's counterintuitive, but it really works.
That's actually really cool to hear. Not that you went through that, it's cool to hear what one of the first times you really realized it within yourself, within your professional life. Because I have always wondered that too, how do counselors do it? Like, how do you not take everything with you? And I have to imagine teachers feel the same way. And I've heard them say that, like driving home, just going through that mental checklist of, so-and-so forgot, why didn't they have their glasses today? They weren't able to see. I should call mom. I should check on them. I should, I wonder if something's going on at home. All these like constant worries. So I imagine that's probably relatable.
I think so too. No, there's a real similarities.
I'm Nikki Herda, and you're listening to Bright, Stories of Hope and Innovation in Michigan Classrooms. Bright is brought to you in part by Mimic Insurance Company, insuring the educational community for more than 70 years. Teachers and school employees visit mimic.com/quote to see how much you can save. Today, I'm chatting with Molly Davis, a counselor and psychotherapist from Alaska who runs an 8-week online boundaries intensive, the Beautiful Boundaries Bootcamp, designed for professional women who may cognitively understand what boundaries are, but struggle to implement them in everyday life, work, and relationships. There is a special discount for Bright podcast listeners who sign up for Molly's Boundaries program. Mention this podcast and enjoy 2 extra weeks of live boundaries coaching added onto your program package at no additional cost. That's 5 additional hours of live coaching help for free. You can find Molly online on her popular Facebook page, Wild Goose Counseling, and on Instagram as Boundaried Bootcamp, where she shares daily boundaries-related cartoons. You can also visit her website, www.boundaried.com, for a free introductory boundaries class. That's Boundaried, BOUNDARIED.com. Up next, we dive into Molly's top 3 strategies for coping with and preventing educator burnout. All right, well, are you ready to dive into our 3 tips?
Let's do this.
All right, so we've got 3 strategies for coping with and preventing educator burnout. Let's go. Number 1, what you got for us?
Number one is that you are a renewable resource. So if you want some help with this one, I recommend thinking of yourself like you're a bamboo forest, or, pick whatever renewable resource you want, but one that will renew itself with a little time. And so when you think about sustainability, when you think about giving, right? Your job can't be done without you doing it. It's very similar in the counseling world, and anyone in the medical profession, same thing. There aren't robots yet that do this job. It needs a human, and it needs you. And you actually have this ever refilling energy bucket, I kind of think about inside. But it has to have some time and space to renew itself in order to keep giving. So on the one hand, we can give and give and give and give as humans. But on the other hand, we can't give without any breaks. You can't just dump it out and expect it to keep pouring. And so as if you think about it, like the kids will always be there. The needs will always be there. The workload will always be there. All this stuff, it doesn't go away. Like if you pour yourself out during, for the next semester, you just pour yourself out and give every single thing you've got to give. There's still going to be needs. As soon as you're completely depleted, there's still needs. They never stop. So if you make it your job to meet all the needs, if you think that that's the boundary for you, that you're supposed to meet every last need, there will be no renewing of you. That's unsustainable, and you will burn out. But if you think of yourself as a renewable resource, like a bamboo forest, you can harvest it, use it. That's fantastic, but it needs some time to come back up. If you can start thinking about yourself, using yourself sustainably, then you can actually meet some needs, and you can continue to meet. You will meet way more needs that way than you will meet if you pour yourself out to the point of exhaustion. And it doesn't feel like that in the moment. In the moment, you're like, no, I just got to give. But you won't be there tomorrow to keep giving, or you won't be there next year, or you won't be there in 5 years.
Your Jenny metaphor, that did make me think of that in a very concrete way. There's going to be another Jenny. There was another Jenny. And if I deplete myself to the point that I cannot continue this work, then I won't be able to help the future Jennies, or the current Jenny, or whoever it may be.
It is hard.
Yeah,
I would say it is hard, especially I think, I get the benefit of working with adults. I feel like, when working with children, a more vulnerable population, I mean, this stuff hurts the heart sometimes. And it is very hard sometimes to partially meet a need, knowing that you could meet it all the way for now. But we have to think about how can I do the most good with my giftings, with my calling, with my abilities, with my talents, whatever it is, with my career. How can I do the most good? And that really helps. Like I can do the most good if I'm here to do the job again tomorrow and the next day and the next day.
What kind of almost like hurt my heart when you were saying that, you can't meet every need, is I often hear this kind of language thrown around in education and just even, in the buzzwords and the marketing and everything, where there's a big emphasis, right, on like the whole child is what they call it. I don't know how familiar you are with this, but, social emotional learning and, personalized and individualized learning. So meeting every student's needs and leaving, making sure every child succeeds. There's a lot of this language, and obviously that is what we want in education, right? That's what every educator wants, and that's what every school wants, but for teachers to have that responsibility to meet all the needs themselves is what's not possible, and that's hurts, and I'm sure it hurts for them. And it just makes me think about even just myself, like using that language and the pressure it might put on a teacher. And I don't think it's any secret to anybody in education that there are some systematic things that need to change. So teachers aren't given everything, and said, oh, here, you gotta do this, and now wear this hat, and now wear this hat. Because if we want to reach that goal, it's not fair to put it all on them, obviously. So there's some big picture things that need to change. And I think any educator could tell you that.
Oh, absolutely. Anyone. Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm so glad you said that, because we're talking right now about what can an individual educator do to help themselves. But we would be remiss to say that, okay, the system bears a whole lot of responsibility here. The systems at large, not just one system, the systems at large are all kind of doing some making this really, really tough. We've got some cracks and breaks in all sorts of levels. And this is all combining to put unbelievable stress on the educator and then on the children being educated. And this is not, so as I give these tips, I am not saying that all the responsibility lies on the educator. And I agree with you. I think it's so fantastic that there's now this language of whole child, just that we're thinking about education in such a holistic way. That is so fantastic. But then the downside of that is the poor educator who's already trying to do their best. And they're like, okay, now it's not just times tables. It's, I have to teach little Susie,
how to manage her emotions.
Everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything, the whole entire thing. And it's not possible. And one of the things that is kind of supposed to be provided in a good system is a team. There's a whole entire team. There's a net. A good system is a net, and it kind of provides a foundation and structure from which individuals can do their amazing work. And so part of having good boundaries is understanding what's my responsibility and what isn't my responsibility. And it is sometimes nice to remember, this is actually supposed to be the system's job. My system isn't doing it, and I am just one little human. I can't do what a greater system is supposed to do. So I need to keep my responsibility to my little sphere, even when it's breaking my heart to see.
All right. How about number 2?
Number 2 is that it really goes with number 1. So in number 1, remember that you're a renewable resource. And number 2 is, so treat yourself sustainably. And this can be really tricky, granted. The teacher, when is the teacher's day done anyways, by the way? You ask any educator, like get home, wake up before, the sun comes up, if you have a family of your own, getting your own kids to their classrooms, wherever they're going, and then you're going to your classroom, and then, you're finishing your day and meeting with this parent or meeting with this administrator or doing this thing, picking up your kid, going home, fixing dinner, helping your kid with your homework, grading papers, when exactly does that workday end? This is tricky. So I say this knowing this can be kind of complicated, but I mean, on the other hand, it kind of doesn't matter. Like, if you don't want to burn out, I don't mean to be harsh here, I'm saying this lovingly, but with firmness, it doesn't matter. You have to do something or you will burn out. Like, there has to be somewhere in there where you are remembering, I am a renewable resource, so I have to renew. And that can be, it's really tricky when we get really burned out. We tend to, since it does affect every other area of our life, the last thing you feel like doing is maybe going for a walk or heading to a yoga class or, doing something movement. The last thing you feel like doing is eating in ways that are nutritious for your body. There's like the last thing you feel like doing are the healthy things that help you be sustainable. Honestly, seeing a therapist is really in there. I think that it's really, as someone who works with educators, sometimes feeling burnout, I can attest to, it's really, really nice to have a place once a week to just, even if all it is at that particular hour is just, you can say it, nobody's getting hurt. And it at least releases some of the pressure, and a lot of times there's some things a therapist can do that really help. Decent sleep, stuff like that. Really being protective of your social activities so if you think about it, when work asks a lot of you, you want to balance it out with things that do the opposite. So if at work you're really challenged and overgiving, you want to try to balance that out with the opposite, make it fun and make it restorative. Like that tends to help, like, okay, the little bamboo shoots are coming up. How do you replenish and renew yourself? Everybody's really different, but it's on you to figure out how can you be restorative during the times you're not at work? What can you do? And if that looks like on Saturday, I binge watch Netflix, fine, great. Somebody else might, take up a cycling class. Cool. Find what works for you. Do that thing almost religiously. Like, it's not an option. You have to renew yourself.
I have many things that I, can think of to ask or clarify, but I'm going to let you do your number 3 and then we'll see. I want to make sure we get through everything in the time we have, and then we can come back and do some more reflections if we have time left.
The third thing is my favorite thing to do, and whoever is listening would be welcome to chuck this if they don't like this idea. It might be a little, again, counterintuitive, but I say use burnout as a catalyst. So burnout can be a wonderful, beautiful catalyst for needed changes. If you are, when you're burning out, sometimes it is, and we've kind of been talking about this all throughout, but you want to take a minute if you can and look at why. What is it that I don't like? What is depleting me? What's not working? What am I doing that I hate? Because when we're burned out, a lot of times it's because we need to set some boundaries or draw some lines or stop taking on quite so much. But sometimes we're burning out in part because we're doing something we don't quite love. We kind of like it, but it's not quite a fit. In working to prevent burnout and recover from burnout, we can use that time to go inward and think about, what do I love? What do I, we've talked before about the concept of values. What actually drives me? What can't I not do? What is the thing that I find fun in the classroom or in whatever educational setting one is in? Use the desire to prevent burnout as a catalyst to start doing more of those things any way you possibly can. For example, if there is a educator who's really, really creative, but you're currently using some modality or we call it modality in counseling world, so I don't know actually what, a curriculum or a program or whatever that you can't stand and drives you nuts and you don't have to use it, then that summer, figure out what else you're going to do. Write some songs and bring in your guitar and teach the kids their facts on that. I don't know if that makes sense, but if you love a thing, see if you can kind of be creative in your mind and figure out, how can I do more of this thing and how can I do less of this thing? Because that sometimes is the gift that burnout can give us. It's a funny one, but sometimes that it helps us better shape the direction we're going for our future.
From what I'm hearing from educators, there's so many that do love it, like they do really love it, at least the part about working with students, but all the extra stuff that's been layered on is, leading them to burnout. And I just feel so much for them being in that position, like they want to do it. They want to keep doing it. It does bring them joy, but all these extra, it might be requirements, they have to do, and then now we have to do this, and now we have to do this. And there's just so much that it's like, you can almost feel it. I think if teacher burnout at this scale might be a catalyst for system change. And that's kind of what I'm hoping for personally.
I really agree with you. And I don't know, but yeah. I don't know what a good system would look like, but I think the thing that's really important when it comes to boundaries is that when you as an educator are caught in a situation where you are using every healthy skill, every coping skill, every healthy tool, you are doing everything you possibly can, and there's just simply no way not to burn out because the pressures on your shoulders are just too much. That's not you. And if so, that's not really a very handy help, but it is emotionally, just because if you think about boundaries, who's responsible? You know what? Not you. This is a bigger problem and you are a victim of it. And so sometimes it is actually emotionally meaningful just to know that, okay, my job is to do the very best I can in this impossible situation. And humans don't do very well in impossible situations when they can't get out. So I know that I am going to have some pretty big burnout feelings, and I need to take extra good care of myself because I am being asked to do something that a human can't do. And it's not on me. And so just not carrying the responsibility for what's happening is a gift. That can sometimes be the best boundary we can set depending on the situation.
That's kind of what I was, wondering too is, if you're choosing, right, I'm going to stay and I'm going to be in education and I do love it. And there's a lot that I have to do a lot of things. There's some things I can't say no to. I can't choose not to do. Do you have any advice? Obviously, I recognize even as I'm asking this that you built an 8-week course. So this isn't something we can answer in just an hour. But, what advice might you give to someone maybe about some of those like emotional boundaries? I'm thinking about what you told me with your experience with counseling, right? Jenny was coming home with you after 4. Jenny wasn't there, Jenny wasn't making you do that. That was like in your head, right? And I'm not saying it's your fault. But you had to do some inner work and some kind of set some emotional boundaries with yourself, it sounds like.
I have 2 different answers. So the first answer is, or suggestion is what they really are, is if someone is going to stay in the system and they understand this particular system for whatever reason, it's just too much, it literally can't be done, but here I am, I'm doing it, then I recommend think of it. For example, you can say that the kind of language you want to use in your head is, I will do this next year, and then I will see. So don't plan your whole life out and decide you have to, make it for 20 years in an unbearable system. If you feel like, yep, I need to do this, or I have to do this, or, I need to support my family and I got to stay in here another year or whatever. Or I really believe in this and I want to see it change. And I just feel like I want to be part of the change. And I can't leave yet, that does not feel good to you, then what you just use the language of small blocks of time. We teach this to students a lot of times. I don't know what, common lingo is. I was taught it as chunking. You chunk stuff up into bite-sized, pieces. You don't shove the whole thing in. And so it's the same thing for us when we're doing something that's really, really difficult and extremely demanding. Break it up into chunks. I'm going to do this through December. I'm going to do this through May. I'm going to do this for this school year. And then I will reevaluate and see if I want to do it for the next year. And when we do that, we're like, okay, I can do that. That's going to be tough. I'm going to be depleted, but I can do that. So that would be my first recommendation for all those who want to stay or need to stay. The second thing I would say is that one of the reasons I started my own private practice is because I didn't like the way that system worked. It didn't work for me, but I loved what I did, and I wanted to do it a different way. And I'd say, now this can be applicable for educators, even if it's just switching to a different school. Sometimes there's a different administration that runs a school a little bit differently. What is beautiful and wonderful for one teacher can be really awful for another. It's not like there's this big right or wrong in how you should educate. There's many, many different ways, but it might mean, I know here in Alaska, there's a Montessori school, there's a this type of school, there's all sorts of different types of schools that are part of our public school system. And so there's all sorts of ways to move into a system that is more conducive to your passion, to your joy, to who you are. Even if you can't do that for a year or 2 or 3, figure out which one you think you'd love and get thee that way.
And this is not a pitch for online teaching, like, oh, everybody should be an online teacher. But I actually have heard that from a lot of our full-time online teachers, that in part they get more flexibility. They're not running all the content. The content's built for them. And so they get to focus on other things. They get to focus on, the feedback and the connection with students. And it looks different because it's not a live class, And so some people that's, not the part that they like. But for some teachers, they found they're like, oh my gosh, I have a better work-life balance essentially. And so some people have reported to me they were able to find that there. So it's not a one-size-fits-all prescription, but I have definitely talked to some educators that have found other ways to contribute their talents in a way that doesn't burn them out.
That's such a perfect example. Exactly. For one person, they need a live classroom. They need it. For the other person, they are like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing ever. This whole online schooling thing, I'm in heaven. Yeah. And so, start trying stuff out. If you're not even sure what you would like, there's no harm in trying. Try something, doesn't work out. Okay. Mark that off the list. Now you know.
Yeah.
Thinking flexibly, I guess, using psychological flexibility to think about how do I set myself up to enjoy my job the most possible, given my personality traits, my passions, and my lifestyle. And that flexibility right there decreases the risk of burnout.
I've been hearing a lot of educators even have resistance, mostly on Twitter. I've been seeing this conversation happen, but almost resistance to the term self-care, because it's used sometimes. I'm not saying by everybody at all. It's in itself, it makes a whole lot of sense, right? It's a good word, it's a good concept, but it's sometimes used like, oh, you just have to do self-care. It's like it puts the burden back on the person. And it's, I've heard educators say, no, I don't need a 3-hour PD on self-care. I need time. And so I just think that's pretty interesting. Like we are seeing, it's a fine balance there, between system and individual, and even when we're talking about these things. So I appreciate you diving into some of the finer nuances with me.
I really agree with that so much. I think that's really, it's an easy fix is to say, well, you should just blah, 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 and then there wouldn't be any problems, but it's actually a lot more complex than that. And within the recognition of that complexity and the multiple levels of responsibility, the individual educator does need to practice self-care, but not the kind of self-care I was talking about where you are a renewable resource. How are you going to renew yourself to whatever level you can, but without taking the responsibility for being, you can't take on the responsibility for being depleted when your job is going to deplete you. That's not your fault that the job is really, really heavy right now. You didn't cause a pandemic. You didn't do any of this. You're just somebody on the front lines, having to figure out how to teach some children. And that's not on you. And so within that framework, we can use self-care really responsibly and lovingly and compassionately, knowing, okay, there's no amount of self-care in the world that's going to help me right now, but I will go for a half-hour walk and do this thing because it will help a little. And I can do that,
Awesome. Thank you. Would you be able to tell me about a teacher that had an impact on your life?
This is so easy for me. Totally. There is this lady, I don't know where she is. She'll probably never hear this, but her name is Tish Hallett. So little Molly in grade school had this magical lady who was like, and they just started like a gifted and talented program. In Alaska, it was like called Quest or something. So I was put in Quest. But I was so lucky to have this lady. She was a passion-based teacher for herself and for the students. And she had at that time, this is the 80s. So, there was a lot, Alaska had a lot of money in its school system and there wasn't a pandemic and all that kind of stuff. But she basically got to do whatever was fun and challenging for the students. And I was like a little creative. I don't know. I was like, read The Hobbit and then I'm like, I'm going to write my own Hobbit. And so she just really encouraged that. She just let me write all the time about anything we were learning. I got to write about it and I got to write about it creatively. And she even said, like, I remember thinking about this later going, I don't think there was any extra credit, but she's like, oh, you get extra credit if you, one poem a day for extra credit. And I'm like, I'm writing another poem a day. And I would go turn them into this little basket. And I don't even know. Well, there wasn't even a point to a grade in that class, really, in a sense. But she had a sparkle in her eye at my creativity instead of saying, no, that's not how the assignment's supposed to go. She's like, oh, I just love that you rhymed the whole entire thing. That's amazing. And gave me props for it and said, do it again. And I don't know. I always felt like the creativity in me that, could be annoying to some teachers because I was always like, oh, we could do it this way. I've always had a great love and respect for it. And I swear, I think it's because of her just smiling and loving it.
Do you see any ways that Mrs. Hallett influenced the way, that you react to others, professionally or personally?
Oh, that's a good question. That's interesting. Probably, actually. I've thought, like, what would it have been like if I had just had really kind of stern, straight-laced educators all through grade school? Would I have even had any light in my eyes left, at a certain point? But because of the great educators I had, I mean, it was more than just her. I don't know. That's a really good point. And I just love it when other people pour out their heart, whatever their talents or giftings are. When it's coming from them, it's just got that sparkle on it, I just light up. I mean, my heart literally, as soon as I'm like, my heart goes whoop, like it swells up a bit. It's like, that's so nice.
Yeah. I was just wondering, because, obviously I know you personally, and I do see that in you, like that you just get so excited and it's so obvious that like, oh, she reacted so positively. Because there is something like so crushing if you like really send a lot of creativity and you present it to someone and they're just like, oh, that's nice. That can be really crushing. So when you've had somebody respond to you in that, like such that way, it is special. And when you felt it, you want to give it to others. Without a doubt, it's challenging work to avoid burnout in a world that asks so much of its educators, and to design better systems that provide our educators with the resources and support they need to thrive. But with leaders like Molly forging our path forward, if there's one thing we're certain of, it's that the future is bright. There is a special discount for Bright podcast listeners who sign up for Molly's Boundaries program. Mention this podcast and enjoy 2 extra weeks of live boundaries coaching added onto your program package at no additional cost. That's 5 additional hours of live coaching for free. You can find Molly online on her popular Facebook page, Wild Goose Counseling, and on Instagram as Boundaried Bootcamp, where she shares daily boundaries-related cartoons. You can also visit her website, www.boundaried.com, for a free introductory boundaries class. That's boundareed.com, BOUNDARIED. Do you know someone who's an inspiring Michigan educator who should be featured on our show? Send us an email at bright@michiganvirtual.org to let us know who they are and why we should interview them. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Bright, Stories of Hope and Innovation in Michigan Classrooms. This podcast is produced by Herbie Gaylord, is hosted by me, Nikki Herda, and is shaped by many of our passionate and talented colleagues. Big thanks to Ann Perez, Ed Timke, and Brandon Batista for their contributions to this episode. Bright is brought to you in part by Mimic Insurance Company, ensuring the educational community for more than 70 years. Teachers and school employees visit mimic.com/quote to see how much you can save. The Bright podcast is made possible by Michigan Virtual, a nonprofit organization that's leading and collaborating to build learning environments for tomorrow. Education is changing faster than ever. Discover new models and resources to move learning forward at your school at michiganvirtual.org.